In 2024, a line of black luxury cars rolled through the gates of the most exclusive private garage in Monaco. Cameras were already waiting. Mechanics stood in pressed uniforms. Wealthy guests gathered behind velvet ropes. Everyone had come to witness one thing: a machine worth millions that no one on earth could fix. At the center of the polished floor sat a rare Ferrari F40 Competizione, glowing under white lights like a museum treasure. Red paint flawless, body perfect, interior untouched. But the engine was dead, and beside it stood billionaire Adrian Vale, jaw tight, eyes cold, wearing a suit worth more than most people's yearly salary. For 2 years he had tried everything. Factory engineers from Italy had flown in twice. Race specialists from Germany had tested every system. Electrical experts from Dubai had replaced wiring. Master mechanics from London had rebuilt half the engine by hand. Nothing worked. He had spent over $3 million chasing one answer. Why wouldn't the Ferrari run? Today was supposed to be the final attempt. Adrian had announced a public reward: $1 million to anyone who could fix it. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. News crews adjusted microphones. Social media creators aimed their cameras. Then something happened nobody expected. A thin teenage boy in gray work clothes stepped out from the back of the garage, wiping grease from his hands. He couldn't have been older than 17. He spoke softly. "I can fix it." For 1 second, the room went silent. Then, laughter exploded. Mechanics smirked. Guests shook their heads. One reporter actually lowered his camera, because everyone in that room knew who the boy was. He cleaned floors. He emptied trash bins. He fetched tools. His name was Eli Carter, and nobody important had ever looked at him twice. Adrian turned slowly, his patience already gone. "You?" he said. Eli nodded once. "Start the engine one last time." To understand why those words hit the room like thunder, you have to understand Adrian Vale. He had built his fortune from almost nothing. At 23, he owned one shipping truck. At 35, he controlled ports across Europe. At 48, he had investments in technology, hotels, private aviation, and energy. He bought islands. He bought newspapers. He bought companies just to close them. People said Adrian Vale could purchase anything he wanted. They were wrong, because the one thing he truly wanted could not be bought. The Ferrari had belonged to his father. Years earlier, before the billions, before the fame, before the steel towers with his name on them, Adrian's father had driven that Ferrari every Sunday morning along the coast. It was loud, reckless, beautiful. And when his father died, the car became more than metal. It became memory. Adrian restored it perfectly, protected it obsessively, never let anyone touch it without permission. Then one afternoon during a private anniversary drive, the engine coughed once, twice, and died on a seaside road. It never stuttered again. At first, Adrian treated it like a simple inconvenience. Then weeks passed, then months, then years. Every failed repair felt personal. Every mechanic who shrugged felt like an insult. He replaced sensors that didn't need replacing, imported rare parts, ordered full engine teardowns, paid consultants by the hour. Nothing changed. The Ferrari sat silent, and silence became humiliation. Business magazines mocked him, the billionaire who can't buy a working engine. Financial blogs joked that Vale had finally found something beyond money. Late-night hosts used the story in monologues. Adrian pretended not to care. But employees knew better. He visited the garage every week. He paced around the Ferrari in silence. He demanded updates no one had. He fired 3 mechanics in 6 months. He stopped attending dinners early. Stopped smiling in public. Because somewhere deep inside, this was no longer about a car. It was about losing control. And Adrian Vale did not lose. That was why he announced the reward. $1 million. One final chance. One final attempt before the car would be sealed away forever. Then Eli Carter stepped forward. Eli had worked in the garage for 8 months. Most people barely noticed him. He arrived before sunrise, swept floors, cleaned oil stains, organized shelves, polished tools, and disappeared into the background. But every night, after everyone left, he stayed a little longer, watching, listening, learning. He had grown up in a small apartment with his grandmother across the border in Nice. No father, no mother anyone spoke about. Money always short. When neighbors' bicycles broke, Eli fixed them. When generators failed during winter storms, Eli opened them up and made them run. When old scooters coughed smoke, he brought them back to life using scrap parts and patience. He never studied engineering in a classroom. He studied broken things. His grandmother used to tell him, "Rich people replace. Smart people understand." So Eli learned to understand. At the garage, he listened as elite mechanics argued over software, sensors, fuel maps, pressure systems. They talked loudly. Machines, he noticed, talked quietly. And every night, while mopping the floor near the Ferrari, he watched what nobody else watched, what they ignored, what they assumed, what they never checked twice. Now all eyes were on him. Adrian's security stepped forward. "Remove him," one man said. But Eli didn't move. He looked only at Adrian. "Give me 60 seconds, he said calmly. The room murmured. Adrian stared at the boy like he was deciding whether to laugh or explode. Then, perhaps out of exhaustion, perhaps curiosity, he checked his watch. 60 seconds, Adrian said. Then you leave. Eli nodded. He walked toward the Ferrari slowly, as if approaching something alive. The crowd leaned in. He didn't touch the hood, didn't inspect the engine bay, didn't ask for scanners. Instead, he crouched low beside the rear quarter panel, near a place no expensive mechanic had bothered to study for long. He placed his hand against a hidden section near the firewall. Then he smiled. And for the first time in 2 years, someone looked certain. The smile on Eli Carter's face unsettled everyone in the room. Not because it was arrogant, because it was calm. The kind of calm you only see in someone who already knows the answer. Around him stood men with decades of experience, factory engineers, race specialists, mechanics who charged more per hour than Eli earned in a week. And yet none of them looked certain. Only the janitor did. Adrian Vale folded his arms. "Well?" he said sharply. Eli didn't look up. "Please ask everyone to stay quiet." A few people laughed again. Adrian didn't. He lifted one hand, and the room fell silent. Even the cameras stopped moving. Eli stood and walked to the driver's side door. "Turn the key," he said, "but don't start it." Adrian hesitated for half a second, then slid into the seat. He pressed the ignition. Lights flickered across the dashboard. Fuel pumps hummed. Relays clicked deep inside the chassis. Eli closed his eyes. He listened. 5 seconds passed. 10. Then he opened his eyes and held out his hand. "I need a screwdriver," he said, "and a flashlight." Nobody moved. One senior mechanic smirked. "That's your $1 million diagnostic system?" Eli ignored him. An older technician near the tool wall, curious now, handed him both. Eli nodded in thanks and returned to the rear of the Ferrari. The room pressed closer. The Ferrari F40 was a masterpiece of engineering. Twin turbocharged. Lightweight. Brutal. Beautiful. But like many masterpieces, it had flaws only time could reveal. Eli crouched again near the rear firewall, where heat from the engine built over years. He removed a narrow side panel most people treated as cosmetic. 2 screws. A small metal cover. Nothing dramatic. Yet as the panel came loose, Eli angled the flashlight inside and smiled again. "There," he said quietly. No one else could see it. He stepped aside. One by one, the mechanics leaned in. Then their expressions changed. Hidden behind a heat shield was a damaged ground wire harness. The outer sleeve had melted years earlier. The exposed section had slowly hardened, cracked, and corroded from heat vibration. Sometimes it made contact. Sometimes it didn't. Cold starts confused the system. Warm starts failed entirely. Scanners wouldn't catch it consistently. Replacement parts elsewhere changed symptoms, never the cause. Millions had been spent chasing ghosts. The problem was a wire no thicker than a pencil. One German engineer whispered, "Impossible." Eli shook his head. "No," he said. "Just overlooked." Adrian stepped out of the car. His face had changed, not anger now, something closer to disbelief. "How did you know?" he asked. Eli set the flashlight down carefully. "When I was 11, he said, our apartment building lost power every week. No one spoke. The landlord kept replacing breakers. Electricians kept blaming old walls. My grandmother couldn't keep medicine cold, so I started checking the generator behind the building." He smiled faintly at the memory. It was one loose ground connection. Tiny spark. Tiny failure. Big problem. Some people in the crowd nodded. Others stared. Eli continued, "Machines are like people. When something hurts for a long time, everyone notices the noise. Nobody looks for the first wound." The room stayed silent. He looked at the Ferrari. All month I watched experts replace expensive parts, but every time the engine warmed, the failure came back. He tapped the side panel gently. "Heat changes weak things first." One of the senior mechanics lowered his eyes. Another walked away. Because they all knew the truth. They had come to impress. The boy had come to understand. Adrian swallowed. "Can you fix it?" Eli answered without drama, "Yes." No celebration. No speech. He simply rolled up his sleeves. He asked for fresh wire, proper shielding, contact cleaner, solder, and clamps. His voice was steady, precise. For the next 20 minutes, the richest man in the room and the most expensive experts in Europe stood watching a 17-year-old rebuild a connection by hand. Eli cleaned every corroded point, trimmed damaged ends, rerouted the wire away from direct heat, added shielding no factory manual had included, secured the line so vibration couldn't stress it again. Every movement was careful. Nothing rushed. Nothing wasted. He worked the way surgeons work, the way craftsmen work, the way people work when they respect the thing in front of them. At last, he stepped back. Done. He wiped his hands on a cloth and looked at Adrian. "Now," he said softly, "start your father's car." The garage became perfectly still. Outside, even the distant city noise seemed to fade. Adrian approached the Ferrari like a man walking toward a memory. He opened the door, sat inside, placed both hands on the wheel. For a second, no one saw a billionaire. They saw a son. He inserted the key. Turned it. The starter engaged. One crank. Then another. Then the engine exploded to life. Not a cough, not a stumble. A full violent roar that shook the glass walls of the garage. Twin turbos whistled. The exhaust barked like thunder. People flinched. One reporter screamed. Several mechanics stepped back in shock. Then the revs settled into a deep, smooth idle no one had heard in 2 years. Alive. Perfectly alive. Adrian's hands trembled on the steering wheel. His eyes filled before he could stop them. He touched the dashboard once, almost like greeting an old friend returned from the dead. The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, phones in the air, cameras everywhere. But Eli didn't celebrate. He simply stood beside the workbench, quiet as ever. Because to him, the miracle wasn't that the Ferrari started. The miracle was that someone had finally listened. Adrian stepped out slowly. He stared at Eli for a long moment. The room waited. Everyone assumed the next words would be about the reward. The $1 million. The headlines. The fame. They were wrong. Because Adrian Vale had just realized something much bigger than how to fix a car. And what he did next stunned the entire room. Adrian Vale stood in front of the roaring Ferrari, but he was no longer looking at the car. He was looking at the boy. At the quiet teenager everyone had laughed at. At the one person in the room who hadn't tried to impress anyone. And suddenly, Adrian remembered something he had not thought about in years. His father, grease on his hands, leaning over an engine when Adrian was a child. If you ignore small things, his father used to say, expensive things break. Back then, he thought it was about cars. Now, he understood. It was about pride, about grief, about listening too late. For 2 years, Adrian had thrown money at a wound that needed humility. He had not been trying to fix a Ferrari. He had been trying to outrun loss. And a 17-year-old boy had just exposed the truth in front of everyone. Adrian walked toward Eli slowly. The cameras followed every step. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the envelope containing the official reward contract, and held it out. $1 million, he said. It's yours. The room burst into applause. But Eli didn't take it. Instead, he looked down for a moment, then back up. I don't need $1 million, he said quietly. The room fell silent again. What do you need? Adrian asked. Eli swallowed. A chance. No one moved. Eli glanced at the Ferrari, then at the rows of expensive tools, then at the mechanics who had mocked him. I want to learn properly, he said. Engineering, design, real training. His voice stayed steady. I just never had a door open. Something shifted in Adrian's face. For the first time in years, the billionaire looked ashamed. Then he smiled. Then take both. He turned to the cameras. Effective today, Eli Carter receives the $1 million reward, a full engineering scholarship anywhere in the world, and a paid apprenticeship under every specialist in my company. Gasps spread through the garage. Adrian wasn't finished. He pointed at several arrogant consultants who had laughed the loudest. You're done here. Security escorted them out in silence. Then Adrian turned back to Eli. And one more thing. A week later, Adrian announced the Carter Motors Academy, a training program for talented young mechanics from low-income families. The first workshop building was named after Eli's grandmother. When reporters asked Adrian why he created it, he gave a rare honest answer. Because brilliance is everywhere, he said. Opportunity is not. As for the Ferrari, Adrian still drove it every Sunday morning. But now there was always someone in the passenger seat, a quiet young engineer with grease on his hands and the future in front of him. Because sometimes genius doesn't arrive wearing a suit. Sometimes it walks in, quietly, holding a screwdriver. If this story inspired you, hit like and subscribe for more powerful stories of ordinary people changing everything. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated?